All right, good morning, everybody. Well, we're going to get started. Thank you so much to our not witnesses, but our guests, and to Mr. Davidson and Ms. Capter, who are here. I'm Chairman Jim Himes of the Select Committee on Economic Disparity and Fairness and Growth, and we really have put a premium on these roundtables because it gets us out of the strictures of a regular hearing and it allows us to have a back and forth that we find really very helpful, particularly on topics that are as important as training and apprenticeships. So I am not going to oversee this roundtable with a great deal of formality because really the objective here is for a casual exchange of ideas. But just to give you a general sense of how we do these roundtables, we'll invite our guests to make hopefully 3 minutes-ish introductory statements. Again, we're trying to get away from the speeches, but 3 minutes-ish introductory statements. And then I will try to foster dialogue by recognizing members in the order in which they raise their hands. I would just remind my members that, again, what we're here about is trying to foster dialogue, not so much making statements. And what we've found is over time that this has really led to a lot of learning. I know that we're going to be joined shortly by the ranking member, my friend from Wisconsin, Brian Stile. I'll give him an opportunity if he wants to make any opening remarks. And I don't want to make any other remarks, but to say that as this particular Congress comes to a close, we are thinking a lot about the recommendations that the committee will make, and it's almost certain that we'll make recommendations with respect to how to really turbocharge the national effort around apprenticeships and training. And that's driven by a whole bunch of things. The realization that a traditional four-year college degree may not be, and it is in fact not for everybody, but the more recent immense number of jobs that are out there that are going begging because in some cases we don't have people well-trained enough to take those jobs. So the question, at least on my mind, is, what are you guys up to? How's it working? And what, if anything, can we do to help? With that, let me do very quick introductions of our guests here. We have the Honorable Melissa Wells, Special Assistant to the President for North America's Building Trades Unions. We have Ms. Marilyn Wren, Chief Program Officer at Coalfield Development. We have Mr. Tony Toddy, President of the United Auto Workers, Local 14, and Mr. Preston Cooper, who's a Senior Fellow in Higher Education Policy at the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity. Let's see, why don't we start with Ms. Wells? And again, we're not going to be too careful on the time, but we're going to try to keep your initial statements to 3 minutes so we can get straight to that dialogue. Ms. Wells, please go ahead.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for having me today for this really important discussion and dialogue. As he stated, my name is Melissa Wells. I'm the Special Assistant to the President of North America's Building Trade Unions. As we know, over the next 15 to 20 years, there will be historic investments made that will spur new construction and increase the demand for skilled labor. So we know that now more than ever, it really is critical that we continue to expand access to registered apprenticeships and continue to ensure that registered apprenticeships incorporate quality standards and worker protections. These important protections of the registered apprenticeship model safeguard the quality of construction, the highest level of training, and the safety and security of the most skilled workforce and competitive workforce that we're going to need to be able to meet the demands of rebuilding our infrastructure in communities across the country. So I also want to just highlight what's working. NAB2, we really commend this week's decision from the Department of Labor rescinding IRAPs and the administration's commitment to protecting and expanding support for gold standard registered apprenticeship models. As many of you know, NAB2's gold standard apprenticeship model continues to be uplifted as, I think, a model that others should aspire to. And our signatory contractors, they invest nearly $2 billion annually. We have over 20,000 instructors and 1,600 training centers providing the highest quality training across the industry. I really want to highlight, though, that one of the things at NAB2 that we really find or that we prioritize is the fact that we know that the demographics of the communities where we live and work, that they should reflect in the workforce that's working on those projects. We know from experience, however, that if you want to increase diversity, that you have to be intentional about that. You have to be intentional about expansion of apprenticeship opportunities. You have to be intentional about expansion of access, especially through access to apprenticeship readiness programs. So over the last 20 years, just to kind of give you a little bit of the landscape, we've registered, we've had 40,000 registered apprentices that were women, 40,000 more than the non-union sector, unorganized sector, and nearly 300 more people of color as well. And the reason why we're able to accomplish this is by way of the use of our apprenticeship readiness program models. Those programs are operated and run in conjunction with the local building trade unions across the country. Currently, we have almost 200 of those programs, and specifically they're focused on recruiting women, people of color, veterans, and individuals that are justice involved. Just to give you a little bit of the stats, I know we have more time for conversation, but 70% of workers who've completed those apprenticeship readiness programs are still in their registered apprenticeship programs. So that's important to highlight because we know how much not only access but retention is really important as we think about building the skilled trades and the pathways there. And so what I'll end with is the other aspect that has made this model successful is our partnership with community organizations and national organizations like Youth Build, United Way, the National Urban League, Catholic Charities. So those are the key aspects of our partnership. So I really thank you for the opportunity for this dialogue, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wells. Ms. Wren.
You. Thank you again, Chairman Himes and the committee members. I'm Marilyn Wren. I'm the Chief Program Officer of Coalfield Development. It's my pleasure to be here today. Coalfield Development is a community-based nonprofit organization in West Virginia, and we exist to diversify the region's economy and create pathways to good-paying jobs and careers for people facing barriers to employment. You know, our state has been transitioning from the coal industry here for a while now, and at the same time, we're working to recover from the opioid epidemic that hit our rural areas very hard and compounded the pain of economic distress by disrupting families and further disconnecting a generation from the workforce. So a little over a decade ago, Coalfield Development started rebuilding our Appalachian economy from the ground up. We knew that we could make progress only by focusing on the employer and the employee sides of the equation at the same time. Employment Social Enterprises, ESEs, became our vehicles to build employment opportunities for people while giving us the time and space we needed to help them re-engage with employment. ESEs are mission-driven, revenue-generating businesses that invest the money they make into helping people succeed in the workforce. Wage-based training is crucial since marginalized workers can't be expected to put their lives on hold to get trained. ESEs have the added benefit of demonstrating what a diversified economy can look like and how it can function. Our first ESE was a construction company, which still operates today. We now operate a light manufacturing firm, an agricultural firm, reclamation companies, and we helped incubate the first solar company in the area. Into these, we directly hire people who face significant barriers to employment. Our workforce training approach combines two programs, a 6-month experience called Workforce Readiness and Professional Success, or RAPS, and then a 2.5 to 3 year program called 3363. Both programs feature paid work, mentor-led, and on-the-job training for 33 hours a week plus 3 hours a week of personal development. During RAPS, we work with people to solve as many barriers to their long-term employment success as possible. Transportation, housing, childcare, and poor health are all common barriers people are facing, and we help them work through. Upon graduation, a RAPS trainee can move into our 3363 program or go straight to work for another employer. If they stay with us, then they engage in 6 hours of higher education per week, working towards an associate's degree or a trade certification. So far, we've generated 600 jobs, and here's what we've learned. First, traditional skill-based training does not support the human development needs that are front and center in helping people engage with employment. Getting people to work is not just about skilling them up. It's about helping people identify and address their barriers to employment. Second, developing employment social enterprises can help communities bridge the gap between social services and employers. ESEs can demonstrate diverse, equitable, and just hiring practices to help train other employees to flex their own hiring practices, making employment more accessible. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Chairman Himes, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. My name's Tony Totti, and I'm the president of UAW Local 14 in Toledo. A true way to stop economic disparity is to first keep the jobs that we currently have. I'm from the auto industry, and it's imperative that we maintain our jobs through the transition to an electric vehicle future. Keeping the jobs in our industry allows us to fund our schools. Toledo Public Schools have many STEM and vocational programs. These programs result in students receiving college credits in high schools while in high school. The business community helps guide the direction of the education. For instance, we have a new trades program, the Building Trades Academy, that will address the shortage of trades across our region and the country. Toledo also just launched Pre-Med Health and Science Academy with its inaugural class taking place this year. There are also new Maritime Academy that will teach students commerce on the lakes. In addition to this, a new Educator Academy has been set up to address the national teacher shortage. Lastly, we're trying to build an EV, electric vehicle, maintenance and repair school that will give our high school students a diploma and a mechanic certification upon graduation. This came about when we heard the needs of local auto dealerships that currently are short their traditional mechanical staff, and they don't know where they're going to get their electric vehicle mechanics from. Because of this training, the opportunity cost, or because of the training for all the other programs, the opportunity cost comes at not funding this program that we're talking about for the electric vehicle program. We're still looking for funding for the facility, and we plan to fully utilize the facility. How it would work is the students would occupy the building during the day, and then during the off hours, existing mechanics would use it. Unemployed and underemployed people could get training as well, and then any displaced auto worker could get training as well. There are many opportunities in the new EV world, and when we replaced the horse and buggy with automobiles, many new jobs and innovation came from the change. We are in that moment again. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Himes and distinguished members of the Select Committee. My name is Preston Cooper, and I am a senior fellow at the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank focused on expanding opportunity to those who least have it. We're at a critical moment for education and workforce training. The Biden administration has announced that it will forgive up to $20,000 per borrower in student loan debt. We can debate the merits of this, but there is an admission implicit in the student loan cancellation announcement. If student loans have become a big enough crisis that $400 billion worth of loan forgiveness is warranted, that suggests that the nation's colleges and universities have failed to deliver the reliable return on investment they've promised. It's certainly true that people with bachelor's degrees and advanced degrees tend to be better off than the average American, but the return on investment varies. Someone who graduates with a bachelor's degree in computer science or nursing will usually enjoy high earnings. They'll be able to pay off their loans with interest. But somebody who gets a degree in psychology or anthropology or doesn't get a degree at all may see little to no increase in earnings. Some may even be worse off for having attended college than if they had never gone at all. But there are pathways to the middle class beyond the bachelor's degree. Apprenticeships, as we're discussing here, are a key avenue for upward mobility, and more students are taking advantage of them. The number of registered apprenticeships has risen 64% over the past 10 years, and almost 250,000 people will begin an apprenticeship this year. The apprenticeship model has proven a promising way to prepare individuals for roles in construction, advanced manufacturing, and even computer programming. One Harvard Business School study identified 3 million current job openings that could be filled via an apprenticeship. One of the biggest challenges, though, to expanding pathways to the middle class beyond the bachelor's degree is that the government has its thumb on the scales in favor of traditional colleges and universities. Traditional colleges have access to Pell Grants, federal student loans, tuition tax credits, direct state appropriations, tax-exempt endowments, and more. What sources of funding exist for non-college pathways are limited and irregular. The solution is to ensure that government support for post-secondary education and training does not unduly advantage one model over another. Programs with a proven track record of placing individuals into high-paying jobs should not lose out on funding opportunities simply because their model is non-traditional. Moreover, incumbent colleges and universities that fail to provide a reliable return on investment should not continue to enjoy unfettered access to federal aid programs. What's key is ensuring that the value of post-secondary education and training, whatever the model, aligns with its cost. Failing to heed this advice has given us the student loan mess that we're in right now. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to the discussion to come.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper, and thank you all. You're a heck of a lot better than we are at staying on the time limits that we're going to try to abide by in favor of dialogue. So in that spirit, we're joined by two colleagues from Ohio, and though the Midwest faces challenges that are not unique, my own city of Bridgeport and parts of Connecticut have the same sort of deindustrialization challenges that we think of more typically of the Midwest. I want to, this committee actually kicked off our work thanks to Ms. Capter in Lorain, Ohio, where we really got an up close and personal look at both the downside of deindustrialization, but the hope that exists in communities like Lorain. So let me start with my colleagues from Ohio and then recognize Ms. Bice. But again, this is all about dialogue. So Warren, you want to kick us off, and then Ms. Capter, I'll come over to you.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks for our witnesses. Appreciate you guys doing the work, and I would just like to say thanks for highlighting the problem with return on investment in college. People, and I want to say, aside from the return on investment, the fundamental problem, regardless of your views on Joe Biden's debt forgiveness, which is illegal, we didn't appropriate the money. Whether it would work or not is also, it doesn't actually deal with the root issue. Fundamentally, we quit doing underwriting. So the federal government makes the loan regardless of what you want to major in, regardless of, you have the same interest rates. You're not pricing in your risk of default. So inherently, there are going to be more defaults when you don't actually do underwriting. That's true regardless of whether you're financing college or pipelines or factories, whatever, houses. You have to do underwriting if you're going to make loans. And so we haven't had that discussion. People will point out that you can't discharge student debt in bankruptcy. And I think the more compassionate thing would be just don't let them go bankrupt in the first place. Some people shouldn't get the loan, and they might go into jobs where they have great tuition reimbursement programs if you even need a degree. So I'm glad we're focusing on a range of things where you might not need a degree. And ways to get people that are in apprenticeship. And I just want to ask a quick question. Ms. Wells, you talked about registered apprenticeship programs. What's your distinction between registered apprenticeship programs versus apprenticeship? I had manufacturing companies before I became a member of Congress, and we had 7 apprentices at the time, but that's only because we only had enough people to be able to train. We had really smart people, but we didn't have all of them with the same disposition to actually train and mentor and develop somebody internally. But we had no registered program. So what are you referring to as registered?
Thank you for that question, Congressman Davidson. So when we talk about registered apprenticeships, we are talking about programs that are they are monitored, they have set standards, and they're certified by the federal government and also at the state level in some cases as well. And so there's a certain level of standards around the number of hours that you work. So I'm speaking about construction, just to be very clear. But in construction, those programs have set hours in terms of hours on the job. And you're also being paid. You're seeing wage growth as well, and then hours of instruction. And then there's also standards around working with journey level workers because they are also part of the instruction and helping kind of pass on that knowledge and skill set to the next generation. And so I think that when we talk about also, when we think about federal funding, we want to make sure that if we're going to be providing funding to apprenticeship programs, that there are set standards because we want to ensure the quality. I think you bring up a really good piece around higher education. I think where there's difference with the construction sector or some of the registered apprenticeship pathways is that we work directly with the industry. So as opposed to leaving college with whatever degree and not having a set job, with us, you're in an apprenticeship program, you're employed, the contractors are part of it. And we have our multi-employer model where they're working together to pay into that $2 billion that I mentioned, to pay into that system.
Thanks for the clarification. And I think to your point, to make sure that if the government's going to fund it, there should be some sort of objective criteria. Seems better than what we're doing for student loans because there might actually be some link to underwriting there. But the concern I've got when you talk about registered apprenticeship programs, there are tons of small and medium businesses, and of course, the bigger the business is, the more formal some of the programs might be. I think the best argument is you wind up with a more portable credential to move from place to place to place. But fundamentally, in manufacturing, you have people who could do different grades of work as whether it's a machinist or tool and die maker, somebody who could do basic repair work or build from scratch. Same one, mechanical and electrical maintenance work. You had credentials that weren't really certified electricians, but people that could actually do some level of electrical work on electromechanical maintenance in factories. And so I think there are a lot more people involved in apprenticeships than we really measure, because a lot of small and medium businesses are just like, well, I have to train somebody how to do this. There's no federal program coming to help most small and medium businesses. They're too busy running their businesses to figure out, which 6 or 9 inch thick binder they're supposed to read to go back to the binder days, or which $100 million website they're supposed to explore down the depths of to figure out how to qualify for whatever program. They're like, I just need somebody that can maintain this machinery. And so I think that's the challenge, for small and mid-market companies. How do they do it? And I look forward to hearing discussions about how we might do that. But I think the big thing is we talk about workers right now. Part of the challenge we're having with inflation is nobody can hire enough workers. We haven't seen massive gains in productivity. We've looked at problems with bringing in people legally into the country so they can fully participate in our workforce as a supply of labor. And meanwhile, we're paying lots of people who aren't actually working. And so we really, while there were good reforms under Bill Clinton in the 90s, those were undone in the 08-09 recession. They've never been re-implemented, and they've even been boosted. So if you look while Joe Biden declared the emergency over, he said he's yet to relinquish the emergency powers. So what does that mean for food stamps, for example, as we work towards a farm bill reauthorization next year? Hopefully ahead of next year, we've revoked the emergency. But if you've got a family of 5 in Ohio, if you qualify for $1 of food stamp assistance, you qualify for the max. So that's never been turned off. That's something that happened COVID era. 30 states have turned it off. Ohio is one of the 20 that hasn't. And that means for a family of 5, you're eligible to get $900 a month. In Ohio, that's a lot of money. And for families who are working 12 months a year, they're at 8.3% inflation. They're only getting, 11 months of pay. So I think we have to look at as our job, how do we increase the supply of labor? And I think we have to remove some of the disincentives to participate in the workforce, raise the participation from about 62% back up to where it was ahead of 08-09, which is around 66%.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Davidson. Ms. Wells, did you want to
Yes, I
respond to
just
that? I'm
wanted
going
to
to go to Ms. Capter.
Yep, I'll be really brief. I really just wanted to respond to in terms of the accessibility of registered apprenticeship programs for small and medium contractors. So I will say that there are a lot of small and medium contractors that are either their own sponsor or they're part of a multi-employer model. So obviously, businesses continue to struggle, but I just want to be clear that there are a lot of these programs, and many of the contractors that we work with, many of them are member owners, meaning that they came into the apprenticeship program and they became contractors. So there are some very clear pathways there. Does not mean there aren't challenges, but there are clear pathways for them.
So when it's my turn, I'm gonna want to revisit. I'm familiar with a lot of the building trade apprenticeships. I think Mr. Davidson raises a good point. Is that also true for small and medium-sized manufacturers, not just building trades? But anyway, I'm gonna go to Ms. Capter, and we'll take that up when I get some time. Ms. Capter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also Mr. Stale. I wanted to thank for hosting this session on workforce development. There isn't a place I drive where I don't see jobs available, workers wanted. And Ms. Wells, I wanted to say thank you for your presentation this morning. I'll tell you, I'm really impressed with your sentence that the building trades expend $2 billion annually, $2 billion, that's with a B, in nationwide training networks with over 20,000 instructors and 1,600 training centers. am fortunate to come from a part of the country where we have some of those great training centers. And honestly, I want to turn you into a college. I represent my hometown of Toledo, and I welcome Union Leader from Local 14, Tony Toddy, today, because our community of Toledo is unique. We have no community college. For 3 generations, our people have been robbed of the opportunity to advance learning. The community college that exists or colleges that exist near us require a car, and there's infrequent or no bus transportation. So our entire city really is absent a community college in its heart. And I've looked at some of our training academies. One of them, the laborers union, is trying so hard they've purchased a building, they fixed it up, they're ready to do training in the heart of our city where we need to rehabilitate homes, build new homes, and their international is denying them the ability to do that. I don't understand why, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but it's the only academy in the heart of our city that has potential to bring people into the trades. Most of our trades facilities are beautiful. They're in the suburbs. Congressman Himes mentioned Lorain, Ohio. Lorain County Community College is quite proximate to where the majority of people live, and the people go there because it is such a hopeful place to be, to get a degree from there. So my question really to you is, how could we work with you to help identify a manner of growing a training center in the heart of our community that would engage the trades that are far into the suburbs? That's really important to us in our area. And Mr. Toddy's talked about the automotive industry, which is the heartbeat of our region: Detroit, Toledo, Avon Lake, Cleveland. I mean, the whole region. We are America's manufacturing center. So do you have models? It wouldn't be in the building trades, it would be in other professions, obviously in the automotive sector, but where the best programs in the country that we could replicate, the best ones that we could take a look at the format. I actually want to invite Secretary of Education out to our region to see if he can help us construct a center of learning, building on our public school system, any private academies that want to participate, going up to a community college degree apprenticeship, and then if they want to go on to engineering, fine. But what models can you tell? Do you have anything like this where the trades have actually become the school in places where where we don't have a community college?
I guess maybe I might reframe it a little bit, but so to answer your question, just want to clarify something that for all building trade registered apprenticeship programs, we also have articulation agreements with community colleges as well for those apprentices that over the duration of that program, when they journey out, they get college credit. So we can also look at, in the case of in Toledo, in your area, we can look at, if we don't currently have articulation agreements, forgive me for not knowing all of them nationally, but if we do not have any there, then we can look into that partnership. Because we do have a robust network of registered apprenticeship programs. And so as to not to reinvent the wheel, we can create articulation agreements there. So I think that's one of the areas. And I do know that we have several programs in Toledo Public Schools. And so that's also a pathway, at least to getting the individuals. I think in Mr. Toddy's remarks, he also kind of alluded to it, but that is a way in which we can get individuals into the programs as well. And so I think those are articulation agreements, and also educating individuals around the fact that they do receive college credit, right? Oftentimes people don't know that. And so when I'm talking to, in my former life, when I used to work for the local Building Trades Council in Washington, Baltimore, talking to parents, talking to teachers and students, letting them know that they may come to the trade, working with their tools, getting the apprenticeship and getting those credits, but that they can transfer those credits to go to college. Maybe they want to become an engineer. Maybe they understand the concepts of engineer better now because of the applied element of being in the industry. So we do have those pathways there for college credit and for articulation, and we're always exploring other opportunities to partner with universities. We do a lot of work in Michigan with Michigan State as well. So we have models where we are partnering closely with universities to grow, to support apprentices and also support individuals getting their college degrees in that process.
Ms. Capter asked a really good question. I wonder, before I recognize Ms. Bice, Mr. Toddy, and Mr. Wren, could you actually address that as well, the nature of the relationship you might or might not have with local community colleges?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. We are a nonprofit organization, and we do run social enterprises, employment social enterprises. It's a little bit of a different model, but we are also, this year, we joined Carpenter Local 439 as one of the less typical union shops. And as we have people hired into our social enterprises, they are earning credits toward their associate's degree when they become part of our 3363 program that has a higher education requirement of 6 hours a week. Part of their on-the-job training does transfer and helps buy down the amount of time they're taking in terms of actual classes at that community and technical college. So it's similar to what Ms. Wells is talking about there. And it's working well for our students because they're able to finish up and get that associate's degree if that's the path that they want to take in 2.5, maybe 3 years. And this is very often first generation college students. And we do put an emphasis on higher education with an associate's degree, or they could also choose to get a trade certification. It's another path that people can take. So we know that college degree isn't for everyone, so we have opened up our program. So if you want to become a licensed electrician or welder or plumber, that's also an available path.
Because I was very interested in your social enterprise focus.
Yes.
When times are tough for families and young people, for whatever reason, are unable to focus on education in their early years, we need some other type of intervention. And it's very interesting what you're saying about the course. You must have, do you have coursework? Do you have books or pamphlets about what you do?
We do indeed. And what we find is that employment social enterprises, because that employment part is super important. People that we hire into our social enterprises, they're earning a wage. They're workers. They're flexing a skill, a new skill in a lot of cases. And as a social enterprise, we can be patient. We're a patient employer. And as we are working with people to overcome these barriers to employment through the development side of our work, after 6 months in our initial program called RAPS, they become a better employee for us, hired into one of our enterprises, or for anyone else in the community that's looking for a worker. Because it's that human development piece that we find missing in a lot of cases. Skill is important, no doubt, but skilling someone up alone won't allow them to be successful in all cases in the modern workforce. It's the personal barriers that often keep people from being successful.
You know, in our region, all of our dealerships, automotive dealerships, could hire 16 mechanics and technicians right now. And nationally, we have a 1 million person shortage for those who repair vehicles, all right? It's shocking. And but one of our biggest challenges locally, we can't get the kids from the school to the dealership. And I said to the dealers, I said, can't you find used cars or something? It just seems like the systems, this is not rocket science. We can do this. But somehow it's not so easy to train, particularly when all the schools and academies are way deep in the burbs and you are sitting inside a city of hundreds of thousands of people with no community college. It's not so simple. So anyway, I'm just really
Okay,
frustrated
we'll come back
with
around.
this
Thank you,
issue.
Ms. Capter. I do want to get to Ms. Bice and then Mr. Stile, who's joined us. Mr. Stile of Wisconsin, the ranking member of the committee, has joined us. Thanks for being with us. Ms. Bice, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to maybe provide a contrary view to what you're seeing in what you're seeing in Ohio. Oklahoma has one of the most robust career tech systems in the entire country. We also have an incredible community college program. And what that does is that allows individuals to look at other opportunities that may not be the college path. And I would say that for many of us, I currently have 2 children, 18 and 21. I think my generation, we talked so much about college, we forgot that there are other opportunities for young people to be successful in other areas, including the trades. We have, sort of abdicated that responsibility to maybe the high schools, middle and high schools, and we're seeing the effects of that right now. This is incredibly important for a variety of reasons, and one of them is that it's a national security issue. When I can't find enough plumbers, welders, electricians to go work on a submarine or work on a Navy ship or help with aircraft maintenance, it's a problem. It's a problem for the country. And so, Ms. Capter, I would welcome you to Oklahoma to take a look at the amazing things that are being done in my state, which, by the way, are state-funded institutions. So it's an incredibly, I think, effective way for us to get these young people into these programs. The other thing that I think is really important to mention as we're talking about the trades is a couple things. I want to piggyback off of Mr. Davidson's comments around the way that we're doing these apprenticeship programs. Occupational licensing is also an issue. When you require an individual to have X amount of hours to be able to even apply for an electrician's license, there are barriers to entry for these young people. And so we need to be looking at that. And to that end, I happen to be at American Truck Training on Monday with a group of individuals that are beginning the truck training program. They don't qualify for Pell Grants. They don't qualify for financial aid in many cases. So there's a focus on higher ed, and in some cases, rightly so. If we're talking about engineering programs, computer science, cybersecurity, incredibly important. But I'm not sure, to Mr. Davidson's point, that if you're going after an art history degree, that we necessarily should be funding that if the opportunities in the future may not be there. I want to ask Mr. Cooper here that a question in regards to sort of that point, and that is, do you think the federal government's focus on a four-year degree impacts the perceived value of the educational opportunities at our community colleges and our career tech system?
I think you're absolutely right that, for too long the federal government has had its thumb on the scales in favor of traditional colleges and universities, which usually means the bachelor's degree. That, traditional colleges, they have access to Pell Grants, student loans, tuition tax credits, a whole other host of, funding opportunities from the federal government, and often those non-college pathways have gone either not fully funded or unfunded entirely. I'm so glad you brought up the example of the truck driving program in your district in Oklahoma, because this is a big part of what community colleges do, is programs that are not for credit and are hence not eligible for Pell Grants and for other forms of federal aid. But if you decide whether something's going to get funding simply by whether it leads to a credential at the end of the road, I would say that's a mistake. We should be looking at whether the education is actually going to lead to a job, a well-paying job at the end of the road. And that's, one issue that I see with expanding apprenticeships, because apprenticeships will often have classroom components that can be done at a community college. But unless that community college classroom components is part of a degree or certificate program, they're not going to be eligible for federal funding. And often the community college is not going to be able to align with the employer to say, okay, the training needs that you have, they can be part of this certificate program. It turns out that often those opportunities, which can be great economic opportunities for students, they go ineligible for federal funding.
If I could just add one additional point, Mr. Chairman, and that is, I recognize that Oklahoma may be unique in our career tech system and our community college system. One of the things I recognized in my previous time as a state legislator is that there's an opportunity for partnerships with the private sector. And I filed legislation that is a Workforce and Education Partnership Act, which would increase grant funding for those jobs that are in high demand right now. So that the private sector could come in and say, hey, I need a program specific to meet these needs. And the institution, whether it's career tech, higher ed, whatever, can tailor a program to fit those criteria. And right now, there are abundant opportunities in my state for these partnerships. And I think it's an important key to bring those folks together because that's going to allow for, I think, long-term success. Any additional
Yeah,
thoughts or
don't-
comments from
any of our guests who
Mr.
want
Toddy
to
or
chime in,
Ms. Wren?
again, we're trying to keep this informal, so, yeah.
Sure.
Mr. Toddy.
In Toledo, we have 69% of our seniors that graduate with 55 college credits or more. 90% graduate with 40 college credits or more, and 55% receive an associate's degree upon graduation. I think one of the things, one of the reasons why we have issues with trades is for two decades now, we've been so successful in the facilities, we say, hey, don't do this, go to college, right? Our own parents are telling their students or their kids, go to school. I think from a federal standpoint, we need to market these trades programs more, make it more attractive. I mean, when you look at the pay and the benefits, these people in these trades make, $100,000 a year plus benefits. That's more than a lot of teachers or anything else. So I understand, especially with what you're talking about with getting degrees in fields that won't yield the return on the investment. So I think Toledo, we have a lot of these programs, but like Representative Capter said, this electric vehicle program that we're trying to get off the ground is another avenue for these students to get this transportation to get to the dealerships is an issue. And right now, we don't have the electric vehicles that we soon will. Our facility Friday just had a $760 million investment by the corporation, not federal dollars, okay? Corporate dollars, right? For this EV. EVs are coming, and we need to understand that and prepare for it. And these kids in Toledo Public Schools, or hopefully will be the pilot program for this, would be recruited like five-star athletes from these dealerships, and we need to give them the opportunity of the future.
Mr. Chairman, could I just say
Yeah.
one thing? I went to private schools through high school. Our parents paid, I worked, and then on to college, all right? And our family paid property taxes for the public schools, which we totally support. But one of the things I realized, a rabbi taught me this in Toledo. He said, Congresswoman, when I was educated, because of what had happened in other places in the world and we emigrated to America, every student that was a part of our system learned a trade as well as academics. And I guess one of the messages I wanted to say here, I support career tech. Hey, I was robbed in high school because nobody taught carpentry. I want to know carpentry. And so I was never allowed. So I don't want a dichotomy to say, well, these programs or these programs. Something is wrong with our educational system, I think, in that, if you go to college, it means maybe you never have to learn how to do something in plumbing or carpentry. I don't think the division should be that stark. I think that we do need people in art history, we do need people in philosophy, or we could go the wrong way from a societal standpoint.
And let me say that, I'm not
But no high school student like me should not have a choice of having carpentry. I hope the educators in the 21st century will be wiser, though we had wonderful teachers. I don't think the dichotomy should be so stark.
Well, let me just maybe comment on that, though. It's not that I don't think we shouldn't have art history or sociology degrees. My comment is, if we're going to charge $100,000 for a degree that a kid has to take out significant student loans, where's the return on investment? Where's the value there for that individual? Because they're going to be paying them back those loans for 20 years.
Let me let me go to Mr. Stiles since he's joined us, but and I'm going to make a quick comment here, as much for really the colleagues and a Democratic and Republican staff as for our guest today. We're now thinking about the report that the committee will make, and it will have an element of the two parties, and the majority and the minority, putting forward their ideas. That'll be good and perfectly predictable. But what as long as I'm chairman, we're going to try to center ideas that might actually be actionable, meaning and in a world where you need a 60 vote majority in the Senate to invoke cloture, that means some support from both sides of the aisle. This area feels to me like a very rich area. I think across the political spectrum, there's a recognition that the federal government has, perhaps, as you put it, Mr. Cooper, put its finger on the scales in favor of four-year degrees and in favor of the concept of credentials rather than jobs and skills. So again, this is almost more for the benefit of my colleagues and for the staff that is behind me. This is an area we really need to mine to uplift ideas that might be actionable. We're going to ask you as guests and to help us think, how do we take a concept and make it more specific and something that this institution could actually do. So, Mr. Stahl.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being a minute or two late. The majority leader, Mr. Hoyer, was recognized for 1 minute on the floor for debate as it relates to an election law that was going through House Administration, where I also serve on the committee. And I don't think shocking anyone in this room, it was longer than one traditional minute. It's very magic. No, in a serious sense, I appreciate you holding today's hearing. I think in some ways this is a reflection back to the hearing that we had in Kenosha, Wisconsin, talking about how we make sure we're preparing people for the jobs of the future and how we can do that through apprenticeships, the importance of working with your hands and the ability that working with your hands provides for a good family-sustaining job in the future and the skills that you need to have it. I have a couple questions I want to ask you, Mr. Cooper. But I do want to note when we talk about the federal government putting their finger on the scale and we see an action by the executive, not by Congress, that spent $400 billion bailing out student loans, transferring that cost to all taxpayers, and the inflationary impact that has, but also the moral hazard that creates. I often ask people, if you thought the federal government was going to step in and pay off your car loan, would you have bought a different car? I think almost everybody would have. I love my Chevy, but would I have probably gotten a few extra bells and whistles? And when we look at the higher education system in this country, we see sometimes a few extra bells and whistles. And I think that's the result sometimes of the oversubsidy by the federal government in that regards. And then we also see the lack of investment in other places. And so Ms. Bice was referencing a truck driving program in Oklahoma. I see that in the state of Wisconsin in particular, where we have jobs that need to be filled and it requires a skill. Commercial truck driving license in that case could be an electrician who needs to invest not only in the training that's needed there, but also I was talking to an electrician in Kenosha the other day who bought thousands of dollars worth of tools and equipment, invested in their own education to be able to get up to speed, bought a truck so they could drive to those work sites. And now that individual who's made that thousands of dollars of investment is not only paying off the student debt of someone else who took a different path, whether or not that's art history or another degree, is now burdened with that debt in an inflationary environment where they're challenged. And so I want to ask you, thinking about this, about how federal dollars can impact these different training programs. And you noted the federal government is fueling a boom in college tuition while excluding apprenticeships and work-based learning. And how could workers benefit if the federal government shifted some of that educational funding away from four-year degrees and shift what would play out if we shifted that into apprenticeship programs, other training programs, whether or not that's a commercial truck driver's license program or an electrician in Kenosha?
Thank you, Ranking Member Style. I think you really bring up an excellent point, that I've talked about how the federal government, under the status quo, has its finger on the scales in favor of traditional colleges and universities. I think the recent action by the administration to forgive student debt has kind of pressed another finger on the scales, or so to speak. I think one of the aspects of this that has been under-discussed is the expansion of income-driven repayments that was part of that loan forgiveness announcement, where going forward, payments on income-driven student loan repayment plans are going to be cut by half or more. And so what this basically does is it creates an implicit subsidy for higher education that is financed through loans, which usually means bachelor's and advanced degrees. Adam Looney, who's a former Treasury Department economist, has calculated that under the new income-driven repayment plan, a typical student with a bachelor's degree might just pay about 50% of what they borrowed. If they choose a major that has a lower return on investment, that might drop to 10% or even 0%. The president's action was aimed at alleviating the burden of student debt, but I see it more as institutionalizing the debt-based model going forward, because suddenly student loans are a much more profitable way to pay for college. Right now, with this new income-based repayment plan, you would be a fool not to borrow the maximum loan that you're eligible for.
But let me
Yeah.
before the chairman takes my neck off for taking us too far off. Let me do it for him,
Yeah.
and bring us back a little bit in a serious sense, because I think it's relevant, because I completely agree with you with what played out. Right, you can look at USC and the maintenance. And the average maintenance worker at USC actually makes more than the average college major who graduates from USC. So I think it's spot on. But how can we shift this model, and actually what can we do to help bring more people in? So one is to remove the subsidies on the four-year college degree side. What else can we do to assist on the people who want to get a CDL, who want to become an electrician?
Well, I think it's all a matter of leveling the playing field. So right now, if you're in an educational or training program that is less than 600 hours, that does not lead to a specified degree or certificate offered by an accredited college, you're not eligible for federal funding. And I think that is a mistake. I still think we should have standards, but I think the standards that we have right now are the wrong ones. Instead of looking at, are you accredited? Is your program a certain length? Does it have a certain type of curriculum? Is there a certain number of books in the library? We should be looking at outcomes. We should be looking at, does the program lead to a good paying job? And I think that there are a lot of programs out there, apprenticeships in particular, that do meet those criteria, yet they are not eligible for, say, Pell Grants to pay for classroom components of learning.
I think and I'm going to yield back here in a second, I think you bring actually up a really good point, right? Is we look at inputs rather than outputs far too often here. We do have programs that produce really good outputs and assist people in earning a family-sustaining wage. And I think that's a really important vehicle that we could explore and allow federal dollars to drive into programs that are actually producing high-quality results, and then market forces would be at play rather than the subsidy approach that I think we see far too often in Congress. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back to you.
May I?
Yeah, please, Ms. Wells.
Thank you. So I appreciate you letting us know where you're going with that piece around the I think the student loan part, because I think that what I would see as the connector between the traditional four-year college pathway and perhaps the trades or the traditional apprenticeship pathway is it's about the market. You mentioned the output part. And I think that what's important to think about is that part of the reason why a lot of individuals that have gone into the four-year degree pathway, those jobs and opportunities on the output are not as well paying traditionally as they have been. And so I think when you look at some of the apprenticeship sector jobs like construction and manufacturing, those are sectors that have traditionally been well paying. And I think that if we want to also lift up the apprenticeship model as being kind of the wave of the future, so to speak, and perhaps in some cases maybe more superior, if folks want to use that terminology, I think that in order for it to continue to be strong, we have to also make sure that those jobs that are attached to those electricians, plumbers, and steam fitters, manufacturing, they have to still be good paying jobs. And I think that that's the piece that on the four-year college pathway that has unfortunately not happened. A lot of those individuals are going into minimum wage jobs, service sector jobs that don't pay as much as they used to. So I think that we also have to continue to look at job quality. And so I just wanted to make sure I kind of added that perspective in that narrative.
Thank you, Ms. Wells. I have a big picture question that I want to ask, but I don't actually have any problem with my Republican friends bringing up their intense focus on the fairness of, or lack thereof, of student debt relief, and I fully anticipate that they will maintain that immensely rigorous focus on fairness when we talk about things like capital gains treatment of carried interest and step up in basis on death and those elements of the tax code that deliver immense value to the very, very wealthiest people in this country, many of whom are my constituents. So I look forward to that conversation and that focus on fairness. But the big picture question I have is, when we talk about training and education, it's not just about the individual, right? There's huge positive externalities, as the economists say, to training and educating somebody. We've talked enough about student loan debt relief, but obviously when somebody who's had some relief, feels less the burden of the cash flow, they can buy a home, they can buy a car, they become a more positive economic unit. Obviously companies and employers really benefit from getting good employees with hard skills and soft skills. So there's just immense positive externalities, as the economists say, to investing in training. So that leads me to ask the question, and this is a question asked really out of ignorance, which is, given that there are just immense positive externalities, that there's benefits to society, to employers, are we paying for training as well as we could be? And what I mean by that is, obviously there's federal funding for apprenticeships. There's a ton of federal funding for Pell Grants and that kind of thing. But what about on the employer side? Our last roundtable was actually about what the private sector and employers are doing to try to address disparity, maybe inside their own companies. But so my question is, should we be doing more funding at the federal level? And the answer, certainly on my side of the aisle, to that question is often yes. But what about employers who benefit extraordinarily from access, especially today, who benefit extraordinarily from access to really highly are employers contributing enough to the training of people who ultimately allow them to thrive? I think, as Ms. Bice pointed out, a lot of the investment is made at the state level. Is that the right model? So again, that's a question asked out of total ignorance, but because I'm really interested, and if we agree that we should be doing more of this, the next question, of course, is then who should pay for it? Wait, give us some insight into how the overall system, Ms. Wren, and then anybody else who wants to opine.
Yes, thank you for that question. I think that as we've been talking here, there's a gap that I would like to discuss just for a little bit, just to make sure that it's part of the discussion, and that is the gap that a lot of people face just entering the workforce period, and having training, whether through a college, through a community technical college, or through a trade school, is great. And it's not always just the skill, like we talked about. There are people, if we want our economy to be just and equitable and diverse, there needs to be pathways for people who struggle with a lot of basic needs. And the interesting place, talking about additional investment, I think can come more at the community-based nonprofit level. More nonprofit organizations can engage and fill that critical space between employers and like what we think about as social services. There's a lot of space in there, and more nonprofits can get into that space and really work on workforce development alongside employers with more investment. Right now, there are 700 employment social enterprises across the nation. And these are evidence-based, successful organizations that have shown that you can employ someone and train them simultaneously. Earn and learn programs are very helpful. And the overlay of that personal development along with it is the piece that, you mentioned earlier that oftentimes, people are too busy running their businesses, right? That's true. People, especially small and medium-sized firms, are too busy. And the help with helping folks transition into the workforce, learn those soft skills, stabilize themselves financially with housing, with transportation. That way, they're better prepared when they do, get the job, when they do connect with an employer. And that's what the social enterprise, the employment social enterprise sector can do if it was invested in.
So what's the to-do for us on that one?
The to-do for you all on that one is, we know that the IRA, bipartisan chips, and the infrastructure laws, those are once-in-a-generation opportunities. And investing in the capacity of kind of this middle tier of organizations that's working to transition people and work on the personal development. A lot of nonprofit organizations, as I said, are not getting into this space. And in our rural and more marginalized communities, part of the problem is when we compete for funds as nonprofits, there's issues of match. Oftentimes smaller and rural communities can't generate the match requirements to apply for larger funds that would allow us to invest in this work. And then there are things within the applications that are barriers, quite honestly, like the EDA, for instance. A planning and development council can get a 10% admin fee, but a nonprofit can't get that admin fee. We need those admin fees in order to build our capacity. It's expensive work working with people sometimes to help them overcome their barriers. And we need to build our capacity to do that work, not just do the implementation on the programmatic side. So more capacity building for nonprofits, more specific focus on helping nonprofits understand, community-based nonprofits understand what it would look like to enter into becoming an employment social enterprise. So we can hire people. We can be that proving ground so people can understand how to get back to work. And it's a strategy that works, as I said, very well with communities of folks that are just as involved in recovery for substance use disorder, migrants, people who just never worked, people that don't have a lot of opportunities where they live. And we would, not that I'm speaking on behalf of all community-based nonprofits, but there's quite a few of us, and that sector would like to have more capacity to do more of this work.
Thank you. Mr. Cooper, I see you have your finger on the button.
Yeah. If I could just jump in on the question of what is the role of employers here, because I think that we do need to be careful about repeating the mistake that we made with traditional higher education, which is that the colleges didn't have very much buy-in when they got access to these sources of funding, and as a result, there was no real consequence for the college if they produced a student with a degree that would just had no value in the labor market. And so while I do believe that we should expand funding for apprenticeships, or at the very least make sure they're on a level playing field with other forms of post-secondary education and training, we do need to make sure that the employers are having some buy-in, that they are, funding part of this apprenticeship themselves, because the whole reason that the apprenticeship model works is that it trains people for jobs that are in demand, jobs that exist, because the employer benefits from having the apprentice as well as the apprentice does. And if apprenticeship is only viable with a massive government subsidy, that's probably not going to be an apprenticeship that's going to lead to a sustainable high-wage career.
But,
have something.
and Marcia, I'm going to try to keep some, I'll come back to Mr. Davidson on this. I don't want to take a lot more of my time, but so okay, I got that. But one of the challenges, of course, if you're an employer is there's a disincentive to train, because you train somebody up, you invest a lot of money, and they go to a competitor. How do we address that problem? Or how does, I don't mean we Congress, but how do we collectively address that problem?
Well, that's why I believe that there can be a role for the government in terms of subsidizing those training costs, in terms of helping to pay for the classroom components of apprenticeships, in terms of maybe providing somewhat of a wage subsidy while the apprentice is in training and not producing a whole lot of value for the employer, but making sure that the employer still is contributing something to the wage and to the training of the apprenticeship, so that there is a benefit to the employer from participating in this, but it's not being 100% subsidized by the government.
Thank you. Warren, you want to?
Thanks, Chairman. And I think we could go down that line for a while, so this is a good area to spend time on. But I want to highlight one other area. So one, I would say that I'm not as familiar with Toledo as I am with Southwest Ohio, and I would commend our community colleges. We have some great programs there, and we have some great tech and trade schools. So one of my schools I was at recently, 52% of their graduating class is actually going to spend their junior and senior year in some sort of tech career field. So, and of course, that might mean something that, to Ms. Bice's point, credentialing. I mean, you need, I think, like 1,500 hours of experience to style hair in Ohio. I'm not sure why, but you do. So if you can do that while you're in high school, and it's part of your thing there, it's not money you have to spend. It's not money that you're wages you're not making there. So I think in our area there are some great programs, and they're partnered with places to employ people. So the HVAC industry has really led the way in my region in terms of sectors that have really partnered and poured private capital into the community colleges and the trade schools to be able to get those funding opportunities, and others are working towards it, whether that's welding or building trades or healthcare. So we've got great partnerships in our healthcare facilities. So hopefully we can do that just as well around the state. But the other area that I just don't know from the commentary, if anyone has expertise in, is second chance programs. So we have, when you look at programs, I don't know that we need yet another government program. So I think there's like 110 education and training grants alone. I know we spend hundreds of billions of dollars on it already. Maybe we could look at using some of those things more effectively rather than just launching another one or 10. But there are some in second chance space. But I just wonder how I think in Ohio we get around 20,000 people out of jail a year. The average sentence is about 2 years. And, in my companies, we had a fairly effective second chance program, but we were always looking for ways to make it more effective. Does anyone have an opportunity to comment on that space?
could.
Go ahead, you go ahead. Tony, I can
The
follow.
EV program would be perfect for that. You know, it would give them a chance to get in and be very attractive to these dealerships that are crying for people, right? To your point, though, the amount of time needed, we recently had 2 fatalities in Toledo at the BP Husky facility. There is a reason why the trades that we're talking about, and they were steel workers, why those are in place. You know, they need to know what they're doing, not to say that they didn't, but accidents do happen. These are dangerous professions. Also, I represent the General Motors facility, and they are woefully short on bringing on new journey people. They just don't put on apprentices as it pertains to mechanical trades, and that's a problem. Also, to your point, and I think the subsidies would help for the government, we had some small suppliers that invested 4 years into an apprentice, and the second they got their journeyman's card, they left that company and went to Jeep in town and got more money, right? So I do believe that would help. It does take 4 years. I think the other thing is, in the industry, there's been a shift from pensions to 401k. And a pension is loyalty. It's loyalty from the company to the worker, and in turn, the worker stays with you. Now that we've done away with pensions, these workers just go to the highest payer. So those subsidies, I do believe, would help.
So to Congressman Davidson's question around second chance, so with the multi-craft core curriculum apprenticeship readiness programs that our councils run, there are several of those programs that are actually in state correctional facilities across the country. I can't promise you Ohio. I think it might be, but I can get that information to your office. But those programs are getting people while they're still under supervision. And those programs are connecting folks to those jobs, getting them the training that they need and the skills that they need. That way, they can find employment in the apprenticeship programs once they leave. I think the other thing I just wanted to kind of get back to, also part of the chair's question, just around, I guess, the funding piece and what the private sector and public sector, federal government should do. So I think one of the things that Ms. Wren brought up, which is really important, is that there is a need for the wraparound services, soft skills, different terminology that folks use. But that is a key aspect in terms of the retention that folks need, and also the removal of those barriers. What I would say, though, is that it is really important that we continue to tie that type of funding to partners that are working with employers or working with programs that are leading people into high growth, high paying careers. And then the other piece I wanted to say is that employers have to have skin in the game. We can't do this without employers having skin in the game. And so I think that it is important that we also look at how do we incentivize employers, contractors to help support in their own dollars training. How do we make sure that they are providing access to high growth careers and pathways? Because I think, to the point of the loyalty piece that came up as well, people do leave because they want to get paid more. So if the market is more level in terms of the wages and benefits for a job, right, or for a certain scale of job is the same, the idea of folks leaving is not as much of a problem, because what I have here is no different than what I could get over there. And so that also opens up more opportunity for newer people to come into the industry that maybe could have been blocked because someone took a job and then left, and then they no longer know how to access it. So I think it really is important that we make sure that we continue to talk about the quality of those jobs and those pathways that people need to get there.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious, for those that have worked directly, as you have, Ms. Wren, with individuals coming into the workforce, what were the barriers, based on your knowledge? Is lack of reading ability number one? Is math ability an issue? Is work ethic? If you had to rank the barriers, as well as the building trades, I would ask for comments. What are those barriers, based on your vast experience?
That's a great question. And the first thing we do when we hire people is we assess them for their barriers. And we have developed, and part of our model that others are replicating now is to develop human development teams. It's a different than an HR function traditionally, but it's really helping other employers understand how to suss out what an employee's barriers may be on the front end. Employees are often very hesitant to talk about these barriers with their employer. A lot of them are stigmatized. A lot of them are just not things that you would want to tell your employer first off. Like, I don't have a driver's license. I'm going to have trouble getting here. But what we have to do is we have to open up these conversations as employers to start understanding these things on the front end. Transportation is actually one of the greatest barriers we find. We have a lot of folks that it's not that they don't have a car that runs, although that's a problem. They don't have a license. We have a lot of folks that that for one reason or another have not received a driver's license. Driver's ed in high schools, I'm not sure if that's decreased. In our local high schools, it's not a class that is, it's an elective now, and a lot of people can't take it. There's not a lot of private driving schools, and if there are, a lot of folks in our neck of the woods couldn't afford them. So not having a license, having your license revoked because of fines, and oftentimes folks don't know where the fines are actually coming from. So navigating bureaucracies to figure out what the barriers are is often a stumbling block for people. Trying to figure out, hey, I tried to get a job, I had a background check say that I was flagged, I don't know why. How do I find this out? So we run background checks for people, not because we want to not employ them, but because we want them to see what other employers are going to see and help them figure out where these barriers are. Childcare is another one, especially for women in the workforce. Having affordable, local, quality childcare is a huge barrier still that a lot of rural places in particular struggle with. So, you know, we do help people with GEDs. If someone comes to us and they don't have a GED, we'll help them. We'll figure out what the steps are to get that. You know, if there's literacy issues or problems with learning disabilities, we want to know that as an employer up front, so we can connect a person with the services. And we may not provide the services, but we know other nonprofits in our ecosystem that do provide those services. So we can help lead a person. We don't do it for them. We help lead them to understand how to identify and solve barriers as they arise. So, you know, in financial literacy, I would say, I've got to mention financial literacy. And so we have 3 hours of personal development that's paid every week. One of those hours is on financial literacy alone. So people can understand how to stay out of credit issues, pay back their debts within their budget, make good decisions going forward, have a forward-looking attitude about the money that they will earn. So it's complex, and it's hard to say that this is it and that's it and this is it. It's different, and people have to be treated as individuals to have those barriers overcome.
I wonder
Thank you.
if Mrs. Wells could comment on that also.
Sure, absolutely. So I second a lot of all of what Ms. Wren said. I think for the building trade unions, a couple of things. So the Apprenticeship Readiness program, that's part of what it's built to do. It's built to help remove barriers. And I think the thing about barriers is that oftentimes people think, you know, there's one or a couple, and then once you get over it, there's no more. But oftentimes these are barriers that will even last into the apprenticeship program, registered apprenticeship program. And so we really are focusing around mentorship and retention, especially for workers that are, you know, women and workers that are coming from communities of color that, you know, may not always have been familiar with the industry. And then also looking at during the program around math, specifically kind of like a crash course around applied math, but specifically industry relevant math to help people understand it. And then we continue to partner with the community organizations who often serve as program coordinators and, you know, provide social work and other vital skills. I do want to speak especially to childcare because that is something that we have this new 501c3 called Trades Futures that we are partnering with, NAPTU is partnering with among others in the industry, and they will be doing 2 childcare pilots, one in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and another one in New York City. And so those pilots are for, obviously we know women tend to be the primary caretaker, but we know young families that there's there's no gender, that's not based on whether you're a woman or man or not non-binary. Everyone that has a family, they have to deal with childcare. And so being able to help provide those apprentices with a childcare voucher that will help them cover the cost. And we're in the pilot stage, but our hope is that we'll be able to replicate this model in other places and find more ways that we can support expanded access to childcare and affordable childcare. And in construction, it is non-traditional hours, really early hours. So we know that we have to find providers that are able to provide that care within that time frame that that our employees work.
Let me jump in here because I'm going to try to bring our roundtable to a close at the top of the hour. So just fair warning to everybody to get anything on the table that hasn't gotten out on the table. And let me just very quickly start with one. Ms. Wren, you said something that really interested me, which is, nonprofits are doing, lots of them are doing really good work here, and a lot of them don't have the capacity. You said we need to improve capacity. I'm familiar with that in the housing sector. I was in the nonprofit world in the housing sector for a while. We had something called Section 4, which provided some capacity. But what's our to-do, if any, by the way, on how to help nonprofits build more capacity?
Sure, thank you for that. As I mentioned, some of the biggest stumbling blocks around nonprofits and capacity building is just being able to access the funds. And as the biggest issue around that, we just had a good conversation last week with a group of anchored nonprofits working on just transition issues. It's really around that match. If a community is told it needs to have 20 or 30% match, that's a big lift sometimes, especially for rural and marginalized communities. And we know that we have large sums of funding available coming down the pike that we want to get deployed. And the deployment is based on whether or not organizations and communities can come up with that match. So I know a lot of that is it's in the legislation around the funding sources. And if there is if there are areas that do have more flexibility, or if there's some ideas around if a nonprofit is in this community or in this sector or doing this type of work, that the match is automatically lowered or reduced, that would be very helpful for nonprofits. Also, disconnecting the scoring on the criteria of whether or not it's going to be funded or not. Oftentimes, if you can come up with 30% match, you get more points than if you can only come up with 10% match. So, the organizations in the communities that struggle the most with this are often also penalized in the scoring process for funding.
Super interesting. We may follow up with you on sort of what can be done in that regard, because, I get it, right? That means that your sort of most needy communities are going to be less competitive against less needy communities. So thank you.
That's correct.
Mr. Dahl?
With the time remaining, I just want to add one additional point to this conversation. I think there's an opportunity to look at the accreditation process, not only of our high schools, but also of our four-year institutions. But park the four-year institutions as we look at the high schools. One of the things that I see in the state of Wisconsin is the embedding of technical college training into our high schools. And that accreditation process is often very complicated for many of our high schools to allow properly trained technical college educators who are accredited in that space to come into the high school space and teach more or less juniors and seniors. And I think there's a real opportunity to explore improving that process, because we talk about the funding side. The funding's already there at the high school level, and we're choosing what courses we're prioritizing. And I think one of those pathways that shows great success is getting people that first year, that first semester of what would otherwise be a technical college training program into the high school. And one of the barriers to that is the accreditation process. I don't know if anybody here has expertise in that space that wants to put in 60 seconds or less. Otherwise, I'll leave it for people to come back to the record later. Mr. Cooper?
Yeah, I would just say that, I'm not an expert on the high school side of things, but I would say, the accreditation process at the higher education level has failed us many times because it is usually based around inputs. What is your curriculum like and how many books are in the library? And I think that the way to reform this is to focus it more on outcomes. And that's not only going to reduce the number of boxes you have to check on the front end, but it's also going to make sure that the institutions receiving accreditation are actually producing value for their students.
In the service of sort of closing up by noon or so, let me give each of our guests, a minute to 90 seconds to throw on the table stuff that's important that we have not talked about, just so we can register it in the record. I know I'm ambushing you with that, but Ms. Wells.
I mean, I think I would just reiterate that it's really important that we continue to focus on having a quality standard around registered apprenticeships. I think it's also important that when we talk about output, that we also look at how are we utilizing our federal investments, especially Infrastructure Act, CHIPS, and Inflation Reduction. How do we ensure that we are supporting employers, but also we are propping up and amplifying employers that are making those investments in workers, that are investing in apprenticeship readiness programs and support services, partnering with the community, and really focus on connecting diverse workers to high growth, family sustaining careers that help them build wealth and economic security for them, families and communities.
Thank you. Thank you.
I agree with so much of what you just said, and I just want to reiterate that there are mechanisms out there, and they are employment social enterprises, and they are, I think, right now underutilized in helping us to solve this workforce need across the nation, and especially when we are trying to reach into rural and marginalized communities and helping people understand how you can have a social enterprise that operates really with, we talk about it as working with the brain of a for-profit and the heart of a nonprofit, and finding that spot where people are able to identify and reduce their barriers to long-term employment success, earn money, get trained, perhaps have that path to higher education. We know that more state and federal agencies could be partnering with employment social enterprises, as could more businesses. So we look forward to opportunities to find out how we can better support these organizations going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wren. Mr. Dottie?
I think we need to help our manufacturing base. In 2019, our facility paid out $200 million in wages for 2,000 employees, right? We're going through the biggest transformation in our industry since its inception, and we really need to look at the powertrain facilities in this country, places like Tonawanda, Flint, Romulus, Spring Hill. They all have engine facilities that are going to be replaced with battery facilities. In 2009, my facility at Willow Run was closed in the bankruptcy for General Motors. Yet the Mexican facility stayed open, and my taxpayer dollars, bailed out this company, yet I lost my job there and we had to move. We're about to face that again. These corporations need the federal government to come in and overhaul our electric grid. Our demand back needs to be, that's fine, we'll do it. It'll cost trillions of dollars to actually take place, but those jobs need to be here in this country, not in Mexico. All EV work needs to be in this country, and internal combustion engines can stay in Mexico.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Dottie? Mr. Cooper?
Thank you. I would just hit on 2 points. Again, number one is that we need to make sure that there is a level playing field between all sorts of post-secondary education and training. Right now the government has its thumb on the scales in terms of favoring traditional colleges and universities, and we need to acknowledge and make sure that apprenticeships and other sorts of non-college pathways are equally worthy of support. Number two, I would just say that we need to focus on outcomes. When we're funding something, we can talk about funding apprenticeships, we can talk about funding college, but the universal principle there needs to be that cost is aligned with value, and too often right now that is not happening.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks very much to all of you. This is exactly the kind of dialogue and conversation we want to have in these roundtables, and we may follow up on some. Again, we're towards the end here. We're writing a report. We really do want to get as specific as we can on recommendations. So if the ranking member has nothing further, we'll close up and say thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. Fun words.